Hello! We're in the middle of soup season. We're at the tail end of pumpkin season. And if you saw my pumpkin pie video, you know I'm just drowning in pumpkin. So it only makes sense for us to make pumpkin soup today. So that's the plan. I'm using the New York Times recipe, and you know what that means. I might have questions and/or concerns. We'll find out together. The weather is just awful here in New York, so I'm ready for a nice, comforting bowl of yum. I'm realizing now, as I listen to the sound of the rain outside, that this recipe calls for rosemary and sage, both of which I have growing in my backyard, but both of which I neglected to go outside and grab before it started raining.
Goodbye.
There he goes.
That's good, it's really raining.
Yeah, it's raining pretty hard.
Here's your clean sage.
Thank you. Get you a man who picks you herbs in the rain. Yay!
Yay!
Now that that's settled, we're going to melt 3 tablespoons of unsalted butter over medium heat in our big Dutch oven pot. The recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of coarsely chopped fresh rosemary, but you don't need to chop it. I'm just removing the leaves from the stems and using 3 sprigs worth. Next, onions, my #1 foe. This recipe calls for 2 medium yellow onions, thinly sliced. I tried chewing gum while cutting to stop the tears and it was still painful, so I don't know. Stir those in to coat in butter.
It seems like a lot of onions.
We're going to let these cook until the onions are lightly brown and caramelized.
Next we need to add garlic. The recipe calls for 4 cloves, roughly chopped. This is 5 and I minced it with my garlic press instead, because it just felt easier. I'm being bad.
Our onions are looking great, so let's get this garlic in there. And then we're adding 2 tablespoons of maple syrup, which I'm never going to complain about. Stir all that in, make sure the garlic isn't in a clump, and let these onions become this really beautiful brown color.
It's smelling really good.
After a couple of minutes, we're going to add 1/2 cup of apple cider and let all these flavors get to know each other until the liquid is reduced by about half. And then it's time to add 4 cups of broth of your choice. I use a vegan chicken broth.
This is the broth base I use.
But you could definitely also use vegetable broth.
The recipe calls for 32 ounces of pumpkin puree. This isn't exactly pureed pumpkin, it's pumpkin cut into chunks from the freezer that I thawed out. But we're gonna let it cook in the pot with everything. It's gonna simmer. I'm confident that it will get soft enough.
I used a kitchen scale to measure out 32 ounces of pumpkin, and I was very glad to make a small dent in the mass quantity of pumpkin that still lives in my freezer. Next, curry powder. The New York Times suggests using only a teaspoon, but because I'm a reasonable person who enjoys flavor, I'm using a tablespoon. Then 1/2 teaspoon nutmeg and a sprinkle of ground cloves. Next, a healthy dose of salt. We can always add more later if needed. And pepper too. Stir to get all those spices mixed in and then bring this to a boil. Once it's boiling, we're going to let it all cook together at a full simmer for 10 minutes. And this is the time when that pumpkin I didn't puree is going to get nice and soft. It also smells amazing. Turn off the heat and let's make this creamy. I'm using an immersion blender, but you can certainly use a regular blender instead. It doesn't matter. We just want a nice creamy consistency. Now I'm bringing my creamy soup back up to a simmer because the recipe told me to, then turning off the heat again and adding 1/3 cup of heavy cream. Stir that in until it becomes one with the soup. And before we serve this, I'm going to quickly make a crispy sage topping by melting 2 tablespoons of butter in my skillet and adding all that sage that Mark went out into the rain to get. Let the sage leaves fry in the butter until they crisp up, and then transfer them to a paper towel. Make sure to save the brown butter that's left in the pan. And let's just take a moment to appreciate this very attractive and aromatic pumpkin soup we made. Top with the crispy sage leaves, I promise you'll feel very fancy, and then drizzle the brown butter on top for a little extra wow factor.
Doesn't this just look like a little bowl of heaven?
Doesn't this look like a little plate of heaven?
The crispy sage on top, I feel like we're really doing something with that. We're cooking. Whoa. It's fire. It's really, really good. Dare I say, autumnal. And it was so easy to make. The New York Times did it with this one. A little extra seasoning and a little extra garlic, but Thank you so much for watching. Happy soup season, happy end of pumpkin season to you and yours. Make the most of it. In the interest of full disclosure, I was worried this soup would be boring. I had concerns, but I'm so pleased. I'm so delighted. It's not boring at all. It's a delicious soup.